Before we get into this podcast, we are sending our thoughts and condolences to the family of Luca Salvadori, who sadly lost his life after an incident at Freiburg in Germany. Luca was a very popular rider and face across motorsport, as he was a successful rider in the Italian Championship and also raced in Moto2, but had a great presence on his YouTube channel and social media. Everyone at Christ Media Group sends their condolences to his family during this difficult time. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Christ MotoGP Podcast, and this week we have Misano 2, and are we going to get a repeat of Misano 1, or is it going to be something different? We're here to discuss all that and touch on a little bit of testing as well, as the teams tested after the first Grand Prix, and there's a few things that we have noticed from that. Joining me as ever, Jordan Morland, is Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. And Pete, Misano 2 hasn't been a double race for couple of years now, and we usually forget how they went. Didn't really always follow just the trend of the first. We usually got a different race usually the second time round. Do you think it's going to be anything different this week if the weather is all dry?
Yeah, sometimes these back-to-backs, they were a little bit flat, weren't they? I think going into the weekend, okay, a race is a race, that's always great. But sort of going into the weekend, it was always a bit flat. I think, the first Misano one has actually set things up quite well, isn't it, for this weekend? All the guys fast at the top of the championship. But of course, there was, Bastianini, and Marquez qualifying badly. They get a chance now to put that right and potentially start from the front with Bagnaia, Martin. Will Morbidelli be up there again? We saw Quartararo was impressive. We saw Acosta was impressive. Bit of bad luck there. They all get another go. The Aprilias and the Hondas, obviously, they get a chance to kind of put things right after a pretty tough time at Misano 1. So, yeah, I actually think, this weekend should be a good one. And, Friday practice. Let's see. Well, also, we've had the test in between, haven't we, as you mentioned in the intro there. So let's see if any parts come along and are brought into the race weekend. That could add another angle to things. So, but yeah, I certainly think the guys that were fast previously are still going to be fast. But the first thing will be the guys that qualified badly, they get another go at it. And that's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that's really it, Lewis, isn't it? It's, as Pete says, those guys that qualified badly, like Marquez and Bastianini, if they can qualify better, we're actually set up for a better race in theory, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at Bastianini's kind of pace in the first Misano races, like he was kind of almost there for the podium in the sprint, and his pace was kind of leader's pace once he'd kind of broken free of that grip in the Grand Prix. So yeah, you'd like to think he'll be up there. Marc, his pace was strong all weekend before qualifying, and it wasn't like a qualifying pace issue. He just crashed, which is, you'd like to think won't be a mistake he'll make twice. It's going to be interesting, and the last time we haven't had these kind of back-to-back races at the same circuit since 2021, and obviously in 2020 it was common, but it's quite hard to judge those kind of two different years, because 2020 they were separated by a week, whereas 2021 there was about, I think it was 3 weeks, a month before between those Misano races.
That's
so
right.
Generally we've seen things close up a little bit. But I don't really, just given how strong the Ducatis are, especially around Misano, I kind of don't really see there being as dramatic a change between these two Grand Prix as maybe we'd seen in the past. I guess we'll see. A lot of it's going to depend on track conditions as well.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it, Pete? Track conditions. I said this before, the weather. I had a check there, and Friday looks like it might be the only iffy day. There's only a few showers forecasted, but the weekend looks pretty good. And I imagine it's like Jorge Martin will want to have completely dry, because he looked so good in the sprint, and he looked great on Friday at the last Grand Prix as well. If it does go completely dry, do you think Martin will start as favourite? Is that harsh to say, or do you think Bagnaia is going to start as favourite because he's got a few more weeks of fitness into him? He looks like he's back to fitness from videos I've seen of him training. It could be a really great battle between Marquez as well if you add him into it.
Exactly. Yeah, I think certainly Martin's got the most to sort of prove, if that's the right word, but he's got to come back, hasn't he, from that mistake? He's got to quickly, as we've seen other riders do, you make a big mistake, you quickly put that behind you and move on. What he doesn't want is two setbacks in a row. One is bad enough with the championship as close as it is, but you don't want two of them. As you say, for that reason, he definitely doesn't want any more iffy weather. He doesn't want to be having to make those decisions again, does he? Not for a while. It could come in the flyaways, of course. We'll probably get some wet weather there, but yeah, he'll be keeping his fingers crossed that certainly the race is an obvious tyre choice. He says he's going with Pecco, whatever Pecco uses, but it's not always that simple, is it? But he'll be hoping for stable weather for sure, and yeah, he's got to, he'll want to come out the box and put right what went wrong previously. But as you say, Marquez very fast on the medium tyre, at the end of the race. So if his qualifying sorted out, and Bagnaia fastest at the test, fitter as you say as well. So it's really hard to pick between them at this stage, I think.
Yeah, that's a question for you, Lewis. Where do you think they lie, especially the top three? Because they're so close on pace. I mean, when you looked at the first Misano, especially on the Friday, I think it was a tenth or two between the three of them, and we obviously didn't get the race on the Sunday because of the conditions that changed, but I'm kind of hoping this, if it's completely dry, that we could see how they all match up in a race, because I haven't really had it that much this year, because Marquez is either qualified out of position and had to come back through, or one of them's crashed out. We haven't really had a three-way fight between them like across the whole race, have we?
No, not yet. And I think Misano's an interesting one, because especially for Marquez's case, it gives him a second opportunity to kind of really dig into where he's weak around the circuit and on the bike compared to the top two Ducati, top three Ducati guys. Really, I don't think we can rule Bastianini out, but he spoke at the San Marino Grand Prix, kind of through those rights, the fast right corners at Cavone, sort of turns 11, 12, 13. That's where he was kind of at his weakest, and quite a few riders commented on just how strong Pecco Bagnaia was there. So it's kind of an interesting experiment from that perspective to see just how much Marquez can kind of close the gap to his Ducati rivals with all that kind of prior information, not having to kind of start from scratch as we do whenever we get to a new race weekend. So that's going to be the really intriguing thing for me. As for the racing part, I hate to be miserable about it, but we did see, just with the nature of this track and the bikes now, the aero, the ride eye devices, it was difficult to overtake, and if you were behind, you were kind of in trouble. Maybe with a repeat race, there's a chance to break through that barrier a little bit, with setup, with just understanding how to manage the tires, manage the bike a bit better. But yeah, I think qualifying is going to be so important, and that kind of first lap is going to be really, really important, and tire management as well.
Yeah, the tire management is going to be key. I haven't really looked at the temperatures, Pete, but if it's hotter than, or even if it's colder, I don't know if that plays a factor into it and who it will benefit, because the conditions were so up and down over the last weekend that we had, that is it going to suit Bagnaia purely because he has the knowledge of the circuit? He's raced, well, he's done so many laps around here, be it on a superbike as well, but I think that he maybe will start as favourite. I don't know why. I think he wants to he looked annoyed, if that makes sense, after having 2 second places, but he did close the gap in the championship. But you got a sense that it's really going to fire him up for this weekend to maybe just try and do the double.
Definitely, yeah. I think he definitely feels like he should be on that top step again, doesn't he? And at home, of course, in front of all his fans, all of Ducati's fans as well. He's going to want to be where Marc was, a Sunday ago, isn't it? Top step in front of all those guys. So, yeah, I think that with the temperature thing, where that becomes sort of critical is when you're in between a tyre choice, where you're not sure, can we make the soft rear last, or do we go with the medium? That's where it really becomes a critical issue. So, as you say, much will depend on the weather. If it's baking hot and they know, look, we've got no choice here, realistically, we're going with the medium, fine. If it's really cold, we'll play safe, go with the soft. It's when it's in between, isn't it? Or when people take a gamble. So I think the opening laps, as you guys have been saying, are going to be really interesting, aren't they? Because we saw Martin beat Bagnaia in the sprint with a Bagnaia type approach, didn't we? Of fast start, attacking, take the lead, and then hold the guy behind off, and then they have all the front tire pressure issues. It's going to be interesting to see if he can pull off a repeat of that. We saw in the main race, of course, that Bagnaia, he held his position, but he was starting from a row in front, wasn't he? So let's see if they're both on the front row. Those first laps, certainly the first lap is going to be massive, I think.
Yeah, it will be massive. And what about the others, Lewis? Like, we've seen a bit of a not a surprise from the VR46 Academy riders. Morbidelli was in the front row, and he looked really strong in the sprint, but then obviously crashed in the Grand Prix. He could have a strong weekend, and almost, I don't know what the position he's in. He has to play kind of rear gunner to Martin, but he's also really good friends with Bagnaia. So it's like, does he just kind of stay out of it, or does he fancy his chances of getting a race win?
Yeah, I mean, I think Morbidelli could cause more problems for the championship because he's, Morbidelli's sort of been in the wilderness for quite a few years. His stint at the factory Yamaha wasn't great, and he said after the Grand Prix that he crashed in last time out. He wanted to win. He felt like he could go for it, so he just threw a caution to the wind, and unfortunately it bit him in the conditions. But I think, Morbidelli will probably, Pramac will have a word with him and go, okay, if you're in a position to not bother Jorge so much, then please do. But, if he's in a position where he thinks he could win the race, he's got more pace than any of them, I think kind of temptation might take over for Morbidelli, as it probably should, just given how long he's been out of the game in terms of being able to fight for wins and to do so in front of his home crowd. He's done it before. He knows how that feels. That's where he won his first Grand Prix. So, yeah, I think Morbidelli will be strong, but I think he'll end up being more of an issue than a help, really. And I think the same is probably likely of someone like Bezzecchi as well, and Digi and Antonio. If those two, first of all, Digi is fit. And, and if the two of those guys can have a reasonable weekend. Bez was reasonably fast at Misano 1, but was generally quite disappointing in both races, dropped back quite quickly, didn't really have anything for the podium battle. So, yeah, that's an intriguing kind of element. And it kind of adds to the Ducati problem as well. Obviously, they've got all these riders, but they're almost sort of in different factions. You've got the VR46 contingent, you've got the Marquez contingent, which doesn't care about any of that. It's an intriguing situation.
Yeah, and Bastianini, he's just chilling by himself. I think he's just like, well, whatever you want me to do, I'll just do my own thing anyway. He doesn't care.
No, I think Bastianini's in that. If anything happens, if there's drama between the top two guys, Bastianini's the guy to cash in on that, really.
Yeah.
So I think he's probably knows in the back of his mind that if Martin, Pecco get up close and personal, if Marquez gets involved, he's the guy that's going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how that plays out. The Ducati element aside, we've also got the KTMs, and I suppose I don't really want to include Aprilia because I don't know what they're going to do, Pete. But with KTM, I think Acosta going to have a really strong weekend again, just purely going off what he done. Obviously he crashed out in the Grand Prix last time out, but he looked very strong, and I think going back to a circuit for the first time really for him in MotoGP, we could maybe see him continue really strong pace, especially on a Friday if get decent weather.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we never quite know what to expect from the Aprilias and the KTMs from track to track, have we? One's up one week, the next week it's another one. Acosta knows he was quick at this track only just over a week ago, so he's actually going to a track where he knows the bike performs, he performs well, and he's had a day of testing, and maybe there'll be a few new parts that if the ones that they can fit for this year. Obviously they all tried the pole bike, the prototype bike, but if there's a different engine in that, as it seems is the case, they won't be able to race that this year. But aero bits, things like that, maybe chassis bits, so maybe that can help them again further. But certainly Acosta was looking, as you say, strong in that first round. He's getting even more laps at this track. It's a perfect situation for him. It's a good point. As a rookie, this is his chance, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And Liz, what's your take on Acosta's chances this weekend and the other KTM riders as well? Do you think the test has helped, do you think, or I don't know. What's your take on it?
I 100% agree with Pete on Acosta's form. We saw kind of through practice at the San Marino Grand Prix, Acosta was quick. And you mentioned earlier, Jordan, if it's colder, there might be, the race might be running soft tyres. Pedro's really, really strong on soft tyres and in practice. And yeah, if you think back to Qatar, his rookie race where we'd already had the test there, he was up there in that podium battle really early on. Of course, he faded back, chewed up his tyres. That to be expected from a rookie, but we've seen what he can do when he gets to a circuit where he's already got some prior knowledge, and I think that will be a bit of a concern to the Ducati boys, because Pedro, again, complete sort of quite unknown kind of quantity and a bit of a joker really in terms of the championship battle, because he's got no allegiances, he's got no hope of winning the championship. He's gunning for a victory, and he'll push it. We've seen. We've seen it's quite hard to overtake, but not for Pedro Acosta. In terms of the other KTMs, I mean, Brad Binder as well, you can't rule out he was strong throughout that San Marino Grand Prix weekend, was fourth through the conditions. I think just KTM need to make sure the qualifying's up to standard, which has not always been. And hopefully Miller can get involved in that as well. That's, again, Miller was a bit kind of, he was up there then fell back again, which we've seen a bit too often from Jack this year. I'd like to see a bit more, there's a good opportunity for Jack to come and have a really good, strong weekend, celebrate, perhaps what we expect his contract announcement with the Pramac, It would be good to see him get up there. And Augusto Fernandez as well, as a confidence kind of thing. He kind of needs to get up there really, or he's kind of facing a bit of a miserable end to the championship, I fear.
Yeah, before we touch on Aprilia, Pete, as Lewis mentioned, it's the Grand Prix this weekend, sponsored by Pramac. It's their home race. They said, Gino Borsoi said that they're going to announce it this week. It's going to be Jack Miller, isn't it? And what's your take on that move for Miller? It's a good sign for Yamaha, having someone that's had prior experience with other manufacturers. Jack's had a Ducati, Honda, KTM. He's had a lot of experience in MotoGP with a lot of different bikes, hasn't he?
He has, exactly, yeah. The first rumours weren't there was that maybe they'll go for an experienced rider, Oliveira. He was and a rookie, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then we saw this suddenly change, and momentum went with Jack. And you do wonder if that was that maybe the Yamaha engineers going, hang on a minute here, for the reasons that you've just mentioned, Jordan. We're in a development phase here. We want the info from somebody who's coming from these three other bikes. You put together the experience of Jack and Oliveira. They've ridden every other bike on the grid, haven't they? One on three different bikes between them. That's a lot of information to come in, and I think that's probably what swung things in Jack's favour. Especially, we're hearing all these rumours about development of the Yamaha and different engines potentially and everything else. These guys are perfect for that, and it does. Yeah, I think that's maybe where Jack's experience is going to come in. That test at Valencia is going to be massive for Yamaha. Those first initial reactions, because the trouble with MotoGP riders is they adapt so quickly. They forget what they've been riding. You need that skill because you go from track to track and different conditions. You have to forget everything and adapt and move on. But when you want, as an engineer, they want to compare the bike. Tell us what it needs. Tell us what, they want people to remember what they were doing previously. And Valencia is that chance to do that. Those first few laps, they often say, look, even by the afternoon at Valencia, they've forgotten what they were riding previously. Yeah. That's how quickly they adapt. So you can bet, we know they're all mic'd up, aren't they, in the pits now, the riders. All of those recordings will be going straight back to Japan because, take, for example, the Yamaha riders might have a problem in a certain sector in the race weekend. Then you hear what Miguel and Jack say, well, this is what the Aprilia was doing through there. This is what the KTM was doing through there. And it just gives those engineers those clues of what they need to work on. So, yeah, I think the Jack signing, is a reflection of the acknowledgement that they need to develop the bike. And guys like Jack and Oliveira have that experience to do that.
Yeah, it's spot on, Lewis. What's your take on it? As Pete mentioned, rumours of an engine change for Yamaha. They've got the right riders in place, especially alongside their factory boys who, I think it's a real statement from Yamaha to just say this is our project and this is what we're going to do. And even the fact that Dovi might be getting involved now in more of a permanent role, it looks really promising, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at kind of both Japanese manufacturers, Yamaha does seem to be the one kind of, it might not seem like it on track, but they do seem to be making the biggest progress in terms of, you look at both, you look at Honda and Yamaha, you look at Yamaha this year, they've been bringing engines, they've been bringing chassis, they've been bringing different parts. Maybe they've not worked, but they've brought them, and that's the crucial thing. That's the thing that for the last few years has been a problem. They haven't brought those updates because, as we talk about this Japanese mentality, the approach is, the Japanese kind of mentality cultures is taking pride in the work and making sure that what you build works. There's no rushing it out, and you don't want it to be out on track and not work. And that's opposite to what we see the European manufacturers do. They chuck things at the bike and they try things. KTM's a perfect example of, they've been running this lab bike on wildcards, and you need that. I think the fact that they brought in Max Bartolini from Ducati, who was Gigi Dall'Igna's right hand man, a really important figure, and therefore bringing Jack in makes sense as well because he's had that prior working relationship. Bringing in, having this idea of doing a V4 engine that we've heard rumours about, which, isn't going to be this magic bullet that's going to send them to the front of the grid. But if you look at all the successful manufacturers right now, what are they running? V4s. Yeah. It's time that Yamaha does move on from its old ways, and it does seem to be doing that. And, going back to the riders at Pramac, it's a shame that we maybe aren't seeing a rookie rider given an opportunity. We know Sergio Garcia's name was linked quite heavily to that, and since his avenue to MotoGP has closed down, it's been a really, really tough time for him. And in Moto2, he's really suffered mentally because of that. And the team of his empty helmets team have really struggled to get him get his head back in the game. But you can understand from Yamaha's point of view, we need to get up the grid quicker. We've got a big rule change coming in 2026. You kind of need to have a competitive platform to build on to go into that. You can't go into a regulation change with a bike that isn't working, because how can you possibly then build a bike that is better? So
yeah, true.
Yeah, Yamaha, it makes 100% sense to bring these experienced guys in, and there's been a lot of talk about Jack and his passport. That's helped, and it definitely has helped. But this is a guy that was really, you remember back when the ride height devices became a thing, he was the guy that had Ducati had them testing, in secret. And even when he'd signed his factory KTM contract, Gigi Dall'Igna was still like, please, at the test these things for us. We need your feedback. So I think Jack, really, from that perspective, he's a great test rider and he wants to race. So it's a perfect kind of matchup. Really, Yamaha get a great test rider and Jack gets to race, which is what he wants to do.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about the ride heights. He was on Chasing the Racing. He done our podcast, I think, at Silverstone, and he apologised. He said it was his fault that he brought ride heights in the MotoGP. So yeah, it just made me laugh. But I think but both what you said, I think he's a great rider. He's really concise with his feedback, and I think it spreads across maybe all the, as he said, Peter keeps bringing up the relationships he's had with his previous manufacturers. They all kind of appreciate the work that he done for them. So yeah, I think it's a good move from Yamaha. We'll come to Honda after Aprilia. Pete, Aprilia at the test, did you see anything or hear anything? Is it like, are we going to see an improvement from them? Because the last Misano and even Aragon was pretty bad for them, wasn't it?
I think it was all braking instability or inconsistency, I should say, seems to be the issue, wasn't it? It was a big surprise, as we all spoke about previously, that they did have these troubles at Misano. We all expected Aprilia to be strong, especially Vinales. He goes well there. The Aprilia normally goes well there, loads of data, high grip. And yet, Vinales said, it's almost like lap by lap, the engine braking is not the same, and that's really difficult, especially for the flying laps, to put together a lap when you're not quite sure what the bike's going to do every time you hit the braking zone. So that was, I think, what his focus was on. I don't think there were any major new parts on the bike. Of course, 3 of the riders are leaving, aren't they? 3 of the Aprilia's riders are leaving at the end of the year. So again, you have that issue of, do you show the guys, something that they're not going to be racing for next year anyway? So Ralph Fernandez, I think, obviously he's the one guy at Trackhouse who is staying. I think he was doing some sort of work as far as next year, but I don't think there are any, major parts yet. Same as we saw at Ducati, really. I think, their focus was very much on fixing their immediate issues, if you like, for this weekend, and trying to understand really, they weren't expecting a difficult weekend either. So let's see, where was Vinales sort of ninth on the timesheets, I think. So nothing, no stunning turnaround in that sense, but if it's consistency he's after, we'll see in practice and over the longer runs if he's found something. But I think that was what they were really working for, was just to get some answers, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial, isn't it, Lewis, because we're going to the flyaways, and they mentioned that they might see a repeat of some of the performances at the flyaways. So this is it's actually quite a big weekend for Aprilia, isn't it? Just to try and get rid of the issue, essentially.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, we've seen over the last few years as well, when we've gone to the flyaway races, is the Aprilia has not been the most competitive package, and it's also struggled a lot with reliability issues for reasons I don't know. We know they've had the problems with the heat, but it seems like the actual mechanical components of the bike struggle in the heat as well. So, yeah, this is kind of make or break for the rest of the season. But as Pete points out, they're kind of in a bit of a bind with what they've been able to test because, Alicia's going to Honda, Maverick's going to KTM, Oliveira's going to Yamaha. You can't really have those guys testing those parts that, for next year that could be really useful now because those are secrets that could go away. So you're relying on Raul Fernandez. And I thought it was interesting what Massimo Rivola said prior to the Grand Prix in San Marino, or the San Marino Grand Prix, sorry, it's not in San Marino. That Raul jumping from the 23 to the 24 Aprilia this year has kind of made them see that the difference between those two bikes is a lot bigger than they realised. And I think they've maybe spent a bit too much of this year chasing the tail a bit, expecting that the bike was a step forward rather than being 2 steps forward. And the fact that the issues that they've had, like whether it's been with grip, whether it's been with braking, whether it's been with tire degradation, they've all come out of nowhere really, and that's been the key issue. Is they've not really been able to pinpoint why. And I think that's kind of an issue as well, is the fact that the problems from track to track don't seem consistent. That's the key issue there, is they're not consistent. We haven't really heard about this braking issue before, really, and then we've had the Aprilia, the low grip, it struggles in the low grip. We get to high grip, it struggles in high grip as well. And it's this is a really important weekend, and if Friday's going to be potentially wet, that's a nightmare for Aprilia because that's all their setup time gone. So they're going into Saturday blind, having to pick up on a track that's green. That if grip's an issue, that's going to be a nightmare. So they're trying to get into Q2 is going to be difficult, and I think Aprilia are up against it, and I do fear that this might just be what we see for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it's so hard to pinpoint because they've looked so good at certain points earlier in the season, Pete. But it's just one of those things. I think that as Lewis says, they just kind of got lost in a bit of everything. It's like, well, we need to just try and pinpoint the issue right now so that by the end of the season we'll have a direction almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good point that Lewis makes about the 23 bike, because you almost wonder if Raul had stayed on that bike,
what would they be doing?
It might have been almost easier to figure out where they've gone wrong. If they did have data from 2 different bikes, maybe Raul had a good weekend at Misano, for example, and then go, okay, this is what's different on that bike, and then they can figure out easier. Now they've actually got all the guys on the same bike, which on paper is what you want because you get all the data from the same bike. You're then left sort of thinking, well, hang on, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. The other thing I think just to touch on with Aprilia is the heat issue for the riders, isn't it? Which doesn't seem to have gone away anywhere. And we're coming up now to the flyaways and the hot races, and the guys were really suffering last year, weren't they? And there was a few guys after the sprint race at Misano, saying it's so hot, on the bike when you're in the dirty air, in a battle and everything else. And physically, the bike seems quite hard to ride, which also seems to be a factor. It doesn't sound like there's been any breakthrough there, even in all this. It's been a year now, isn't it? Basically. I mean, those guys are really going to struggle at some of these rounds with the heat. So it's just something else that's on their plate that they won't want this time, really. Yeah.
Well, let's see how Aprilia get on this weekend and if they can solve the issues. And coming on to Honda, Lewis, at the test from the photos that I've seen, that they looked like they were the one testing the most. They had a lot of, Marini was testing certain aero packages, Zarco was. Mir commented saying that the aerodynamics were a good step, but not what he expected. It just seems to be a same sort of message, doesn't it? It's kind of better, but it's not better, if it makes sense. They want more and more and more, and the engine seems to be the thing that's obviously it's clearly the issue still.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of told that there was going to be a big radical overhaul of the bike, which, to be fair, is what we were told last year as well. Coming into the Misano, it was going to be a big, it's going to be a big change, big bike, important, blah blah blah. Yeah, Mir's comments were very much suggested that wasn't the case. He expected more. Everything wasn't really a big step forward. They tried this kind of aero package. It was similar to Ducati and what most other people have been running now, really. And it was met with good reviews, but like fundamentally, an aero package isn't going to pull you up the grid. And again, Honda really needed a good platform to then be able to come to the Valencia test and have something better there. Which, we touched on it earlier with Yamaha. You can just Honda brings a reasonable amount of upgrades for this test, but nothing really, see apart from the aero, seems to really be hitting the right marks. And compared to Yamaha, who didn't really have anything new to test because they'd been trying it all already.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key issue here is Honda's waiting too long to put these parts on track, whether it's at a test, whether it's at a Grand Prix weekend. So when the riders actually get hold of them, you're already in delay in terms of the feedback and what you can do, and you're running out of time now. These flyaway races, the riders can't go and test anymore. There's no scope to go and do a private test now. And this is the start of a triple header, and then you've got a week off, and you've got another triple header, and we're into the end of the season. Honda have run out of time for next year, and the step forward with the bike for next year at the Misano test clearly wasn't big enough.
Yeah. It's really tough, isn't it, Pete? It's almost, I'm kind of looking at it like, I can't wait to see what Alicia Spargaro has to say, or what he thinks of the Honda when he gets to ride it, whenever that will be. They just kind of, it's just, you get a sense that the riders are just not disappointed, they're just like, it's not really changed, and it's kind of been like that for a couple of years now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. You do wonder if this is, Nakagami's spoken about, isn't it? There's communication between HRC Japan and the race team, and it's almost like the race teams, as Lewis was mentioning, the race team were expecting something bigger to arrive. But is that again a bit of a sign of this miscommunication, that actually there weren't these huge things arriving? It was a step, but it wasn't the radical. We were hearing words like full package and all this kind of thing. And Nakagami's spoken about that. That I think he said that the guys in the paddock, they don't know what the guys back in Japan are working on at the moment. And that's one of the things that he wants to sort of, bridge that gap next year as far as the communication side. Even though he's going to be based in Japan, he wants to be coming to the races just so he can talk to all the guys, say, look, this is what we're working on. And also hear what they want, the parts to be worked on. And so I think, as you say, Mir, he's pretty clear, isn't he, with his words these days, and he expected more. I think also maybe there's a bit of a cautionary tale here about the whole V4 thing. Let's remember there's V4s winning every race. There's also V4s finishing last in every race at the moment in the Honda. And I think it's not an instant. It's not going to be as simple for Yamaha as that we just need that. I think that's the cautionary tale is that, you might end up like Ducati, or you could end up like Honda. And certainly Yamaha at the moment are a lot closer to where Honda are. I think. Lewis has summed it up. There's not much time left now for this year. They need to be working on next year. But it is interesting, this philosophy, as you say, they've got concessions. So Yamaha have sort of, they've gone step by step throughout the whole year. There is no big, a new bike is arriving at this test. It's gradual, bit by bit along the way. Whereas Honda still seem to be a bit sort of, they're still using the old sort of development system, which the factories without concessions need, where you plan around the couple of official tests during the year and aim for a big upgrade. But if it misses the mark, you've got to wait then another month or so before you try anything else. So it's a very different approach that we're seeing. And the aero, that, as you've said, Jordan, as well, that seemed to be the major thing, didn't it? Let's see if that makes a big difference. But that was really the only thing. And I think they've got to now look to 25, haven't they? And interesting, as you say, Leish getting on that bike, obviously a lot of years at Aprilia. Let's see, because let's see what his feedback is on it, because they've got a lot to do at the moment. It seems they're still, they're a long way off where they need to be, aren't they?
Yeah, Lewis, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, Pete raises a couple of interesting points. That communication thing. You remember kind of the end of last year, start of this year, there was lots of rumours of Davide Brivio coming, potentially to Honda as a team principal or something like that. And one thing he was always credited for at Yamaha and then laterally at Suzuki was being able to bridge that gap in terms of communication between the race team in Europe and the Japanese manufacturers. And Honda, I don't know if it's Alberto Puig isn't suited to that job. I don't know if it's Honda management is, back in Japan is more of a problem. Like we've spoken about it before. The head of racing in Japan, I believe, doesn't speak English. So when you're talking about communication issues, you can't be in a situation where the person handing down judgment on budgets, etc., can't properly communicate with the race team, who natively don't speak English either. So there's that's going to be a really key kind of stumbling block that they do need to figure out, whether it's with managerial changes, whether it's with some sort of process change that they do need to get on top of, because if you look at Yamaha with the engines and stuff like that they've already introduced, if there is a V4 on the way, I think when we get to Valencia, all the teams will be allowed an extra engine into the allocation because of 20 races in the championship.
Right, yeah.
So if the V4 is ready, Yamaha could very well drop that into the bike for Valencia and put a race on it to try and then get ahead of it for the test. Whereas if Honda doesn't really have anything step forward, again, they're waiting until the test to be able to improve, to introduce anything. So yeah, this
we've had
the way of working that Honda is doing right now just does need to be completely overhauled, and it kind of almost seems like they're going backwards. We had sort of news a couple of weeks ago that they've parted ways with Kalex, who they'd been working with a little bit last year on swing arm and a chassis, which was all quickly dumped anyway by the Honda riders. So there was a bit of outside the box thinking there they've now gone against, either because they've gotten spooked by the fact, we tried something that isn't, in the vein of Honda and it didn't work, so we must try, go back to our old ways. Yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's going forward at any rate and in any sort of area either. And yeah, you're losing, you're gaining someone like Aleix, but if you're not bringing the developments to the bike, someone like Aleix isn't going to be able to do what he is capable of.
Yeah, true. Yeah, more questions than answers for Honda, sadly, at the minute. There's nothing I can really be positive about, but who knows? They could have a breakthrough eventually, but yeah, I think, like you both said, time is run now for 24. 25 is the focus now, so we'll see how they go over the next few rounds. I had a question from one of our listeners on YouTube that says, can you just touch on Moto2 and the absolute chaos that's happening there in that title fight? Lewis or Pete, you both chip in, but I think it's been a great year, and I don't know if it's the Pirellis that have done it or if it's the development of Boscoscuro versus Kalex, but I think it's been a really interesting championship. And whereas the results or the standings at the minute, I have them here. They are, yes, so Ayagura is currently top with 175 points. He's 9 points clear of his teammate Sergio Garcia, but then you've got a load of riders who are like 42 points off, and like in that gap down to 10th, it's 78 points to first. Who do you think's going to win the title, gents, out of all this? Because we've got so many good riders in there. We've got Agura, Garcia, Aldegar, Jake Dixon's in there, Joe Roberts is in there, even Tony Arbolino, who's 10th in the championship. I mean, I'd say he's very outside chance, but at the rate things are going in Moto2, I can't call who's going to even be on the podium week on week, never mind win a title. Lewis, any take on Moto2?
Yeah, I think, like you say, I think there's two key elements as to why Moto2 has been so good this year. The tire changes are always a massive, kind of leveling factor. And yeah, the Boscoscuro chassis being a stronger prospect. We see this in Moto2. When the class started, everyone, Suter chassis were kind of the most competitive, and then people started winning on Kalexes, so everyone went to Kalexes, and now we're seeing much more of a migration towards Suter chassis, and it's not. I think on this occasion the Suter chassis is probably a little bit better than the Kalex, but when it comes to Moto2, I don't think it's ever really been a case that there's been a genuine performance jump on the chassis. It's just that the good riders have then been able to ride, those alternate chassis, shall we call them, for the purpose of this conversation, and therefore everyone else goes, oh well, if that person's doing well on it, then I have to be on that chassis. Doesn't always work that way, but I think that the it's a hard one to call because for so many factors. You've got people like Ayagura who has come close to championships before, so this is looking like maybe he's better. One of his best chances, and he's going to MotoGP, so there's a point to prove he wants to step up as a world champion. Then you've got his teammate Sergio Garcia, who we touched on a little bit earlier, who has been overlooked. He's now stuck in the class for another year, but his performances have tailed off, and he's now in a point where this was arguably the strongest guy the first half of the championship. Yeah. Now he's, I think Garcia is a very good case study as to the kind of the fragility of the athlete's kind of psyche, really, because it is very easy to get knocked off your stride, and what we see with Garcia is a little bit similar to what we saw with Quartararo, in his kind of Moto2 days. You remember, I think he spoke about his final year in Moto2 as it would end up being, it was Argentina or something like that, and he was at the back of the grid.
That's
He
right.
went right miles off the pace, and he was just like, what am I doing here? And unfortunately, Garcia is now kind of going through that point where, he looked like he was going to be going up to MotoGP. He's been told, or he thinks he's not good enough, but really the thing that's stopped him going up is his passport. Unfortunately, it's nothing to do with his talent. Now he's kind of spinning out, and there is an opportunity for other guys to come up and take his place. But there's other guys in there that haven't got Moto2 seats or have been overlooked for Moto2 seats. So there's a point to prove there. Joe Roberts is a good example of that. Jake Dixon as well. There's a lot of different little stakes involved in the Moto2 title fight. And I think that's what make it good. It is a hard one to call. I think Ayogura looks like the best because his is the most sort of suited in terms of he's got his future secured, so he can just go out and ride. He doesn't have to think about anything else. Where the others, there's kind of a point to prove to be like, well, I need to put myself in the shop window for next year because there are a couple of seats in MotoGP up for grabs.
Yeah, that's true. Personally, I think Agura's the favourite, and it's just obvious because he's leading the championship, but he's been in good form, and even the injury that he's had has not really stopped him. He had a good comeback ride in Aragon. He finished inside the top 10, then he had a really strong weekend, obviously winning in Misano. And yeah, just a little fact, he actually carried a Daijirakado flag for our listeners. It was given to him, so it was like over 20 years old, what I thought was a really nice touch as well. And yeah, a pretty cool link there. But you mentioned, Lewis, that he's got his future secured and he looks pretty confident. Pete, one rider who does have his future secured, but maybe the pressure has just got to him this year and hasn't went, is Fermin Aldeguer. I mean, signed to Ducati even before, I think, was it before the season that even started, really, wasn't it? So before he even started Moto2 properly, he knew he was going to MotoGP, and it's just been a bit of a head-scratching year for him. He still won races, but yeah, the form is not there at the minute.
No, he needs a strong end of the year, doesn't he, to take that pressure off, really, and show why he's moving up to MotoGP next season, and stop some of those questions. And you guys have said it already about the championship and how open it is. Interesting for me, started off the Boscoscuro with all that advantage. Lewis made the point about Calix working with Honda and then not working with Honda. You do wonder, they're not a big team, are they, at Calix? There's not a lot of people. I think it's about 12 people that work full time for Calix. You do wonder if now being able to focus fully on the Moto2 again, it does look like the Calix has come on strong, hasn't it, recently, and is regaining its sort of previous dominance. So interesting to see now if that continues for the rest of the year, especially when at the moment, it's the Boscoscuro guys who are still filling those top, most of the top 6 positions in the championship. So will we see that just sort of edge towards the Calix guys and help make the championship even closer as we get to the end of the year? But if you're looking, you always got to beat your teammates, haven't you? And as you say, coming back to Aldeguer, that's the problem he's got, is that even on the races last year where obviously the end of the year was fantastic, but even at the other rounds, he was quite often the top guy on the Boscoscuro. So that went to his credit, didn't it? Now, the trouble you've got is that lots of guys are winning on it, and it's not always him. And even when he, so even on his good days, that there's quite often another guy on the same bike ahead of him, and that's a difficult one to explain, really, isn't it? So yeah, a big. He needs a big end to the year. Also, Chantra, he's also moving up. He's on the Calix. He's going to want to put a few good results under his belt and also show that, for the reasons you guys have said, there's a lot of guys at the top of the standings, Agura being the exception, who are not going up to MotoGP. And those guys that are, they need to make their case a little bit, I think, during these remaining rounds, shall we say, even though the deals are done.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Jake Dixon gets on for the rest of the season as well, because they have made a real step with the WP suspension. Obviously, a few teams running it on the Calixes, and they seem to have a real issue at the start of the year. I don't know if Pedro Acosta testing things has helped them, but yeah, they've looked really strong, and Dixon's carrying good form at circuits where he struggled even last year. So interesting to see how this Moto2 title fight plays out. And yeah, that's my little advice for the weekend. If anyone thinks MotoGP might not be the best racing we're going to get, maybe it's like boring, Moto2 will be interesting for sure, and of course Moto3 will always be Moto3, it'll always be good too. So yeah, just to come on to the predictions, guys, for the Misano 2. Pete, Lewis, anyone want to go first? Who wants to give their sprint winner and their Grand Prix winner predictions?
Right, well, yeah, I'll get mine out of the way first. And then I was Bagnaia. I think he's going to go for the sprint. I'll put him down for that. And you know what? I'll go Marc for the Sunday win. We've spoken about it before. I just think that nothing to lose side of it is still his strongest weapon at the moment. And you know how fired up Marc is to win in Italy.
Yeah,
so,
very true. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this might actually prove to be kind of a pivotal race in this championship battle because of that 7-point gap between Martin and Bagnaia, and obviously Marc being on this roll. If he can get another Grand Prix win under his belt, another good sprint result, it removes all doubt as to can he be in that in terms of I think you can't look past Martin for the sprint just based on what we saw last time out, and obviously he's got a point to prove as well after making himself just look a bit foolish really at the first Misano race with his pit blunder, and then Grand Prix. I think if Marc can get the qualifying sort of you just with the momentum, and he knows the track, and this is, we spoke about Pedro knowing the track and coming to a track he knows. It's the same for Marc now. He's not had that opportunity to come back to a track that he knows, and he's got the data, and the bike was fully spot on for him. He had the feeling he wanted. So looking past Marc for the Grand Prix win is going to be hard, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think Bagnaia will win the sprint. I think he's not going to let what happened in the last sprint again, because he was really annoyed obviously with his start. I just think Martin got an absolute belter, and I mean Bagnaia got a good one, but I think Bagnaia will want to if it didn't rain, let's say in the last Grand Prix, I think Bagnaia was going to go because it looked like he made that perfect start. And I think he'll win the sprint. The Grand Prix, this is tough because, like I say, it could be colder, might not be as hot. The last time we had a second Misano race, Marc Marquez won it. Yeah, do you know what? I'm going to say Marquez for the Grand Prix. I don't know what it is. I think he's, like you both said, he's in that perfect position of just being not too close, but he's not too far away. And his biggest weapon at the minute is his confidence. He's got the bike set up. He's thriving off, I don't know, he probably loves the booze. He not loves it, but he said they go in one ear and out the other. It fires him up even more. Yeah, I think Marquez will surprise and get a third Grand Prix win in a row. So I know it's be completely wrong, but just going off feeling on a Monday morning, I think that's what's going to happen this weekend. So anything else, gents, you want to add, or no? I think we've covered everything, haven't we? Yeah, that's it. So if you enjoyed the podcast, folks, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're watching there. Give us a comment of your predictions. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, give us a 5-star review and follow so you never miss an episode. But until then, we'll see you next week for another episode. And take care.